When I was a little kid, my dad decided, for reasons he never explained to me, to get religion and become Catholic. And at that time, I was going to number 83 public school. I was in the third grade in Baltimore, inner city Baltimore. And I was transferred to St. Elizabeth's of Hungary Catholic school, which was a good place. It was run by the Franciscan nuns. And back then, they all wore the outfit, right? Yeah. And I remember I then became Catholic. And starting in that school, I really didn't do well, right? Except I did well in math. The reason I did well in math is because when I came into school, I hadn't had any religious education at that time, right? And so I was just learning all this firsthand. And when I come into school, there was a big crucifix in the front. Now, what I seen was a guy nailed to a plus sign. So I thought, these people are very serious about their arithmetic. So since then, I've always excelled in math. I know there's people's going to have problems with that. I am so sorry. But anyhow, other than math, I never really did good. And I got past the third grade, got past the fourth grade. In the fifth grade, I met Sister Brenda. Now, Sister Brenda was a nun where, she always, for some reason or other, picked on me because, might have been because, remember those yellow number 2 Ticonderoga pencils? Remember those? Right? I used to chew on mine. I'd go through 2 a day. And at the end of the day, I had all these yellow paint chips. I looked like a rabid beast. And for whatever was wrong, she told me to stay after school. So I probably, in the 5th grade, maybe a dozen days, I didn't stay after school. And fast forward to the end of the year, it's in June in Baltimore, hot as can be, even before global warming, right? And we're sitting in there waiting for report cards to be handed out, and Sister Brenda hands out everybody's report card except for myself, a guy named Frankie, and a guy named Anthony. And she told everybody except us 3 to get in line, and then she would, take that line outside, walk around the school, and go across the street, and their parents would be waiting. And so she told us, she said, you guys wait here until I get back. So, I was like, at that time, before she was handing out the report cards, I was mostly looking forward to a nun-free summer. And when I didn't get a report card, I knew what it meant. I was like a boxer that just took a standing 8 count. And my 2 buddies, after she left with the rest of the line, they looked at me and they said, I wonder why Sister Brenda wants us to wait here. And I said, it's because we failed. These guys deserve to fail, right? So what I did was I decided that I was not going to hang around for that, so I bolted. Now, every year on the last day of school, my father picked me and my brother up from school. It's the only time he did. He was a pretty hard guy, blue-collar guy, and he'd pick us up from school and we'd show him our report cards and so forth. And I remember thinking, there's no way I'm going to tell him that I failed. So there was something I knew about Sister Brenda. When the class line came around the building and past the convent, and she was one lazy nun. So she never took and walked all the way around with the rest of the class. So I took and left, bolted around a corner, bolted all the way around the other way, waited against the wall. She didn't disappoint me. She left and went into the convent. The rest of the class came around, and I got in line with the rest of the class. So the class goes around, it goes across the street, parents are waiting. My little brother's already there with my father, and my father's looking at his report card. So I come across and say, "How you doing, Dad?" And he goes, "Where's your report card?" I said, "Well, Sister Brenda didn't give me one." And actually she hadn't, right? So he starts walking across the street. He's smoking a Tarryton. He takes it, throws a button, and goes, all right, whatever, get in the car, right? So we get in the car, and he takes us to a sporting goods store, which he would always take us to the sporting goods store and buy us a little something, right? For graduating. So my brother is running through, he's picking up everything. And as I'm in the sporting goods store, it started to hit me what I had done. And Dad says, well, Robert, don't you want anything? I said, nah, Dad, I'm good. He goes, I'll get yourself something. So I got a first baseman's mitt, which I still have to this day. So we go home. Mom was the same way. Brother runs in, gives my mother his report card, like a baton in a relay race. And I come in, where's your report card? I don't have one. Sister didn't give me that. I've never heard of that. I'm going to give that sister a call. Me thinking, okay, Mom, I'm on the edge here. I said, okay, Mom, go ahead and call her, right? And so anyhow, my mother never called her. And whenever the phone rang, I'm sitting in there looking at this old TV that just looked like a test pattern. And the school never called. And then the summer started. And I remember that summer being the longest summer of my life. Because I remember every morning I'd wake up, you'd feel great, and then it would wash over me. Man, I failed. My parents don't know anything about it, right? They think I passed. I'm going to get executed when they find out. So one day led into another. And even my buddies would say, Robert, what's the matter? You look like somebody just stole your dog. And, I knew if I told anybody, it'd be around the world in a moment. So I said, nah, nothing, so forth. So anyhow, I get through the whole summer. First day of school, I got my own new school supplies. I'm with my brother. And, we had my buddy's mother, Miss Molly, used to take us to school. And she was a portly woman. And she drove a red Volkswagen. And we used to call her the big fat tomato and a little red bug. So she comes and picks us up and takes us to school. I go there. I really don't know what I'm going to do. So I get into, the St. Elizabeth's was one of those schools where they had a separate line for each class. And I got into line. What line am I going to get into? Sixth graders, right? So that's the one I get into. My buddy Frankie and Anthony are in the other line. Fifth graders, they're looking at me like, hey, dude, hey. And so anyhow, the bell rings, lines start going in. Kindergarten goes in first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade. And then sixth grade, I go in, teacher that year, Sister St. Thomas. As I go in, I'm last. She grabs me, puts me against the wall. I thought, oh, man. She goes, Sister Brenda told me what you did. She told me that you failed, and you didn't wait for her to kind of this, that, and the other thing. You put yourself up. So she didn't know what to do, so she passed you. Now, if that isn't a good result of putting an idea into action, people, you tell me what is. Maybe I shouldn't have done it. Maybe I should have. But I did, and because of that, I learned to take risks. I wish I could tell you I was a better student that year and the rest, but I wasn't. And but I did manage to pass the sixth grade, and I remember coming home with the report card, and my mother said to me, your grades aren't too good, but I like it better when you receive a report card. And I said to her, so do I, Mom. So do I. So anyhow, fast forward to high school. In high school, my graduating class, I wasn't a very good student. And come towards graduating April, I was failing every subject except gym. And I had a couple buddies of mine approach me during gym, as a matter of fact, when I was in the locker room, and saying, hey, Rob, what are you going to do after high school? I said, well, I don't expect to pass. They go, well, we're going down to see a Marine Corps recruiter. Why don't you go down there with us? So I did. and I wound up with them joining the Marine Corps in the buddy plan, which to me is probably the best thing I ever did, because everything I ever accomplished I owed to the Marine Corps for the things I learned in it. For example, so I left there and I went to Paris Island for boot camp, then Camp Lejeune for infantry training, home on boot leave, and then it was Vietnam. This is back in 1968, and give you an idea what the casualty levels were in Iraq during any given month. The casualty levels would be maybe 100 or 200 on both sides. In Vietnam, it was closer to 40,000. So, I mean, it was a real war. So I joined the 26th Marines, and I became a rifleman. And so that's what I did. I was with a combat company, and I learned some important things. I learned, for example, it was never a good idea to smoke at night. If you were going to walk with a platoon on a night ambush, you'd be a lot better off third or fourth or fifth, and you really didn't want to walk first. I also learned discipline, and discipline in the sense of what it means to, when you make a commitment, you say you're going to do something, that you actually follow through and do it. I learned that. I learned, and right along with that is responsibility. And I learned that if I had the right motivation, I could accomplish anything. Eventually, I walked point. I walked tail end Charlie, which tail end Charlie, if you're the last guy and you're on with about 8 guys and you're walking and you're out at night and it's pitch dark, it's not the most dangerous position, but it sure is the creepiest. I learned I carried a radio. And carrying a radio back then aren't like the radios we have today. They were 29 pounds and had an 8-foot antenna. And it was like carrying a sign that said, "You were the only communication. Please shoot me first." So anyhow, the Marine Corps, after a month and a half, I was wounded, come out, was given orders after the hospital in Japan, got orders back to Vietnam, and finished my tour, came home, got a job in a steel mill. In Vietnam, the way I got through that, and the one thing I want to backtrack on a minute, is when I first got to my unit, I was a replacement for 4 guys that were killed the previous 2 days ago. And in my squad, the guy who'd been there the longest had been there 6 weeks. He was 19 years old, and he was the guy that was calling the shots. So I didn't think I stood a chance of getting through this thing alive. And the way I did it was, first I thought about it a lot, and right when I learned what the situation I was in, and I remember I had probably the only anxiety attack I ever had. And I got to the point where I was sweating, it was hard to breathe, and then it occurred to me, man, I'm going to die here. And when I accepted that fact, and I made it my goal every day just to be around from alcohol, I was fine. Now, I can tell you that same thing that I learned there in Vietnam that got me through there every day, just living from alcohol the next day, right, got me through everything I ran into later in business, because nothing was that dire. But sometimes, everybody here being an entrepreneur, tough to see the light at the end of the tunnel, isn't it? Yeah. And so just looking at things a day at a time really did it for me. So I came home, eventually went to college, graduated from college, magna cum laude, which is very different from me because you understand I wasn't exactly a good student. Then I came out, and then I went to, took the CPA exam, passed it the first time, and became an accountant. And I got involved in the microcomputer industry back in early 70s. And the way I did that was I was out in Redmond City, California, and not too far from the Stanford campus, and I had time on my hands, and I went to the Stanford bookstore. I had like 12 hours before a flight. So I went over to the Stanford bookstore, bought a book on BASIC, read the book while I was waiting for the flight, and wrote a computer program to analyze a bunch of leases that I was looking at for my employer back then. When I got back to my office, I was lucky because my company was owned by Control Data. We had a dumb terminal there. So me and the programmer that worked for them got this program working, and I became hooked. And I learned how to program from them, taught myself how to program. So, since then, a lot of people ask me, well, Bob, where'd you learn how to program? And I tell them the truth, Stanford. So when the first Apple came out, I bought one. And I taught myself how to program. And what I would always do is whenever I wanted it to do something, I'd write the code. And I'd find out, and I loved doing it. This was my hobby. And I remember my dad told me, he said, Robert, if you love something, it tells you all its secrets. And it's true, I didn't learn anything in college. I was all self-taught, so I worked harder than anybody else. And besides, for me, it was a fun thing. So that's what I would do for fun. And I got to the point where I was pretty good at it. And then when the first IBM came out, I sold my Apple and bought an IBM PC. And in 1984, I opened up a small business in my basement, which was to sell a money management program that I wrote called Money Counts. And I decided this thing was pretty good. I've been working on it for a number of years. And I would compete with the big dogs back then. Were Managing Your Money by Andrew Tobias. And it was Quicken was just getting going back then. And my product. And so I had, at the time I started this, I had $15,000. So I decided to do this, and I got to tell you that, you guys being entrepreneurs, when you first start something, nobody tells you anything, right? You learn everything by yourself. Usually you learn it the hard way by things not going the way you want it to go. And so, it was kind of like, use a really bad analogy, is you're like a young guy walking into jail for the first time. You're going to learn a lot of lessons. So the first year, I lost all my money. I tried selling it like everybody else did. I tried getting packaging as best as I could. As much as you're going to do for $15,000. Next year, I took another run at it. First year, I tried selling the product at $129. Next year, I kept improving it. $99, $69, had different packaging made, tried to get involved in some multi-level marketing. Every disaster you can think of, right? It was like, man, that's another way not to do it. So I lost all my $25,000 the second year. The third year, I was broke, but I had always paid my bills, always paid it, so nobody knew how much money I had. As far as that was concerned, I was flush. So back then, in 1987, I had a company call, or 1986, had a company call me. It was a company did this rag out of Fort Dodge, and they sold on the front page an advertisement. The outside front page, right, was an ad. That's the type of magazine it was. So anyhow, they said the ad's normally like $16,000, $17,000. They would sell it to me for $5,000 if I could get creative in a couple days. So I did. I changed my advertising, and I said a product was called Money Counts. I dropped the price all the way to $12. For those of you that have been in the business a while, software back then was copy protected. You couldn't give it away. You could only make so many copies, this and that. So I removed every barrier I could think of. I said, you can copy it. You can give it to your friends. You can do whatever you want as long as you send me $12. And the ad made money. So immediately I took that ad and started calling all the big computer publications. And I That's how I turned the corner. I learned the secret. The secret back then was a smoking deal with a big ad that caught people's attention. Not the little ads, not the packaging, not that other stuff. So that's how I learned how to do the direct marketing. In '87, I quit my job my real job and did it full time. And eventually the company, I built it up to where we had 1,000 employees. We were doing on a volume basis 4% on units, 4% of the country's software. We had customers in every country, and I sold it to Intuit. Intuit knocked on my door, asked me if I'd be interested in selling the company for, I remember my wife and I, let me back up a second. My wife and I decided, that's my first wife, decided if we could sell the company for $40 million, we'd do it. Intuit offered me 60. Now, I didn't go to Stanford. Actually, I never really did go to Stanford. I didn't go to Harvard, but I knew enough to know to reject the offer. So I told him I was insulted by the offer, and eventually got the price of the deal up to $64 million. So I sold Parsons Technology then to Intuit. After I sold it, I became the chairman. And I learned that when you're the chairman of a company like that, and you don't own any stock, and you don't have anything invested in the company, basically what you do is you order lunch. I also had a deal with them that said that if I left, I had 1 year where I couldn't work. And, they withheld some funds and all that, so it had a little teeth in it. So anyhow, after a year of that, I retired and moved to Arizona. And when I was in Arizona, I had a year. And any of you guys play golf? Yeah. You play golf. You told me you play golf, Joe. Raise your hand. All right, there you go. All right. So I moved to Arizona, and my buddies told me, they said, if you play golf every day, you're going to get really good. So I played golf every day, and I was worse at the end of the year than I was before I started. Problem is if you play golf every day, the only guys you can play golf with are the guys that wear, when you get old, when you hit a certain age, you start dressing in strange colors and patterns. It just happens, You start dressing like, the best way I can describe it is like a flag from another country, right? So I was playing from a guy that looked like one time, he looked like, he might have been Slovakia, and another one that could have been Turkey. And I decided, you know what, I got to get back in the game. So after my year was up, I decided I would start another business, and that business eventually became GoDaddy. And what happened is the internet was just going then. This was back in '96, and I didn't have any idea what I wanted to do. But I knew from my prior business that the best way to know what to do is to be involved in the stream of that business in some way. Because when you're inside the economic stream, you see the opportunities, right? So what I did was, I had, by the way, I got divorced along the way. And so, my money was split in half. And I hired a bunch of very intelligent people, and about 30 of them. And we started trying all sorts of things. And the plan was brilliant, right? This was an idea I tried to put into action. The plan was brilliant. The plan was that we would take and try a bunch of things, and whatever worked, we would do, and whatever didn't work, we would drop. It sounds brilliant, doesn't it? You want me to tell you what the problem with that was? Nothing worked. So after a while, the only thing that gelled was I hired some people that were building websites for customers. And the problem was, though, is that the internet really wasn't was just kind of, most businesses didn't have a website. And to do a website back then was expensive. So I'd have people come to me and say, why don't you give me a software package where I can do my own website? And I thought, okay, fine, you got a deal. And I started working on software that would do that. And we created a product called Website Complete. And Website Complete is in its 50th or 60th incarnation now. We started selling that for $12, got no traction. And then after a while, we noticed that, and then again, this is out of desperation, that in order to get traction, maybe we ought to start selling domain names also. Because we noticed that the companies that we would get domain names from, because every website needs a domain name, right, were a pain in the ass to deal with. So we did that. We became a domain name registrar in 99. And in 99, the internet was still booming. We had a hard time really getting noticed because people were paying, like pets.com and so forth, paying crazy amounts for ads. Like they pay $300 for a lead that would make them $6, right? And so we wouldn't even have people talk to us. So we kept going and going. And in the year 2000, I decided that I would probably shut GoDaddy down. Now, what brought it to that was the way I used to manage my finances was I would say, okay, I'm going to operate this business. I got $35 million. Until it hits 30 million, then I'm going to start to really worry about it and I'll make a decision, right? And then I'd get to 30 million and I'd say, okay, 25 million, then 22 million, then 20, then 18, then 16, then 14, then 12, then 10, then 8, and then I got down to 6 back then, and I remember thinking, wow. I remember I decided back then when I had 6 million left in the year 2000 that, or 2001, excuse me, that I would shut the company down while I still had a few bucks. So I've been the type of guy, one of the things I believe in is that it's best to keep your own counsel. So very seldom do I discuss my important decisions with anybody. I decided I'd shut the company down. I shut GoDaddy down, and I would go to Hawaii and decide what I was going to do, how I was going to pay my creditors, always pay my bills, how I was going to pay people severance, and what I'd have left. Well, as I was in Hawaii, and I was at the Four Seasons on the Big Island, and as each day went by, I remember thinking, man, I don't want to shut this thing down. I had no light at the end of the tunnel, but I wanted to keep it going. And the big deal for me was there was a guy parking cars one day, and the guy was my age, and he went to park my car. And the guy, I tell you, he was happy as a lark. And the guy obviously had nothing, right? And so I remember looking at this guy going, how neat that he's that happy. I said, this guy has nothing. I got 6 million and I'm miserable. What's wrong with this picture? So I decided that I would go back to Arizona and I would keep running GoDaddy and until it went broke. And if it went broke, I'd go broke with it. And I decided that if the worst thing was that I'd park cars, actually, I wasn't going to park cars. I decided I'd go to Vegas and be a stick man on a craps table. It's a fun job, don't you think? So what happened was in 2001, the dotcom crash happened. And when the dotcom crash happened, GoDaddy was one of the few companies that was paying its bills. We had competitors vanish in the dozens by the week. Not competitors for buying advertising and that sort of thing. Nobody was paying their bills. All of a sudden, I have more friends than I thought I had. And so when I couldn't buy advertising before, I had people lined up to give me a smoking deal for it. And not only were they giving me a smoking deal, but the ads that we were running were, it was promising, low-price domains, good service, same thing we do today. All of a sudden, they got traction. And in October 2001, the company became profitable. I was that close to shutting it down, right? I was that close to being successful when I was going to shut it down, but I didn't. So then we started growing like a weed. And we got to the point where in 2005, we had a 16% market share. We worldwide had it for that, for a while. Never could really get off of it. And I hired a market research firm to tell me something that was obvious. And what the market research firm told me, they said, the reason your market share is not growing is because a lot of potential customers are not, I used to advertise on the internet only, are not going to, that advertising is going to reach them. You got to do traditional media. So we had a $10,000 war chest back then, and I decided that I would reach out and buy a Super Bowl ad. So we did. Now, the problem with a Super Bowl ad, guys, back then it was a little more than $2 million. They're over 3.5 now. But problem with a Super Bowl ad is people are watching the Super Bowl for its ad, but most of them are half-hammered, right? Most of them are involved in discussions. And if you don't have something that's going to really catch their attention, they're not going to pay attention to it, right? So what happens to your money? Down a drain, right? So I was watching this commercial by Mike's Hard Limeade one night, and it was a guy who was with he had a bottle of limeade that had a few drops in the bottom. There was 3 women sitting at the end of the bar, and rather than him raising it up and getting the last few drops, he stuck in a 12-inch tongue and lapped up the bottom of the bottle, right, and pulled it out. And the bartender come over to the women who were mesmerized by this guy and said, "Ladies, what do you want?" And they all pointed to him and said, "We'll have one of those." Now, to me, that was quite an ad. And because I was talking about it the next day. So I decided that what I would do is I would at least get the name of my company burned into most people's memories. We would have a very beautiful model, very well endowed, and we would have our name across our well endowment, and we would do something a little risque. And we decided to do a spoof of the Janet Jackson wardrobe malfunction, which took place the year before. So I couldn't get it approved. I mean, they sold it to me, but I couldn't get it approved, couldn't get it approved. Got it approved a week before the Super Bowl. Shot it from behind, shot it from in front of her. It was blurred. You couldn't see anything, right? But people's imagination ran rampant. So right after I got it approved a week before the Super Bowl, a guy from Fox Sports says, "You want to buy another one?" So we bought a second ad at a deal. They approved it twice in writing, and we decided that we would do this, both of them, one at the 2-minute warning and one in the first quarter. So we run the one in the first quarter. Servers go wild. Come to the one at the 2-minute warning. The ad doesn't run. In place of our ad is a network ad of Homer Simpson stabbing a baby. For The Simpsons, Fox network ad. So our ad never does run. So I call the president of Fox Sports. I got all my staff. They're angry. They're upset. They're saying, this isn't right, so forth. So I call him. I get him on the phone. He's at the Super Bowl, and he said, "Look, we had to pull your second ad because it wasn't in tenor with the rest of the ads." And the first ad caused so much commotion. And I already had it approved twice. So I remember the people in my office are all upset because I had him on a speakerphone. And I remember turning to the guy who was my chief operating guy, and I said to him, "Can we be this lucky?" And in fact, we were. So I wrote a blog article about it, got picked up everywhere. No ad had ever been canceled on the Super Bowl, right? Especially that there was a contract. First time ever on any network, an ad was accepted and then canceled. All right, so that ad was shown on all the news channels. It was mentioned on all the radio shows. It was in all the newspapers again and again and again, all right? And better than that, it became a standard for the network indecency. Now, my mother's very proud of that. Now, more importantly, because of that, our market share that week jumped from 16% to 25% worldwide in a week, and it held. Fox settled with me. I didn't have to pay for the second ad, and I got my money back for the first ad. So it was probably, next to joining the Marine Corps, one of the best things that ever happened to me. Now, I have a question I want to ask everybody. That year, the term GoDaddy was born. GoDaddy Girl was born. And we started doing our advertising that way. And what I have to ask everybody here as an entrepreneur, if you ran an ad and your market share jumped from 16 to 25% with one ad, would you do it again? No? You guys are very sedated. All right. So anyhow, so that's what I did every year. And right now, GoDaddy's ads are at, our market share in North America is at 68% at domain name registrations, and worldwide is 50%. I did a deal with some private equity groups that KKR and Silver Lake, I know all you guys know them, and then another one to a lesser extent, TCV, where they purchased all but 27% of GoDaddy. I'm still the largest shareholder, and the company was valued at the time we did the deal at $2.4 billion. So it kind of worked out. During all of this, we've been kind of a risque company. Everything's been a little edgy. That's all going to change, but it's the same old GoDaddy in many ways. And one of the things that I've always done as I run the company is I always had a saying that you do better when you're happy. You do better when you feel good, if you come to work and you're positive, you're more productive. You tend to come up with more ideas. You're happier to work long hours. And my little brother told me something years ago, and it's something that I instill in every business of mine. And that is, we're not here for a long time. We're here for a good time. And everybody, I had a good time being here tonight. Thank you so much for giving me your attention.